In today's video, I'm going to share 5 tips to make weeding heat transfer vinyl as easy as possible. I'm Karley Hall, and if you're new to my channel, I post a craft tutorial every single week. So if you love crafting, make sure to subscribe to my channel. Today's video is going to be all about how to make weeding HTV a little bit easier. But to start off, I want to quickly discuss what HTV is. So you're looking at a roll of heat transfer vinyl, also known as HTV or iron-on. They are all the same thing. And it is a vinyl that you need heat to activate the glue. So you can see here, you cannot see or feel the glue on this sheet of vinyl. And in order to activate it, you need to use a high heat point, and it will melt the glue into whatever fiber product you're putting it on. So for example, a t-shirt. If you're having a hard time distinguishing, is it adhesive vinyl or heat transfer vinyl, I would recommend taking a weeding hook and just peeling back the corner. You can see that this one is peeled back already, and I can just peel it back. And if you can't feel any stickiness on the colored portion of your vinyl, chances are it is heat transfer vinyl and needs to be heated up to activate that glue. The liner may feel tacky, but as long as the colored portion has no stickiness, you're probably working with heat transfer vinyl. If it's sticky to the touch, that is regular adhesive vinyl. So now that you've identified you have HTV, let's jump right into the tips. Tip number 1 is font choice matters. So of course our Cricut machines and our Silhouette machines can cut super thin, but if you want to make weeding a little bit easier and you don't want to risk damaging your design, having a thin font will cause problems. So making it a little bit thicker or choosing a thicker font will make weeding and applying your design so much easier. So right now you're looking at a pretty thin font. I would try to avoid anything that has super thin fonts like this. And of course, there are going to be projects where you want a really thin, delicate looking font, but you will need to increase the size to make sure that your Cricut machine can realistically cut that thin. So if you want a thin font and you know that your image is pretty tiny, kind of tip 1A is you can offset your font. So say you love this font and you know, oh, this is gonna be kind of thin, I'm really risking it. To make weeding a little bit easier, you can come up to the top right here and slightly offset it. It doesn't need to be 0.25. You can actually scroll this over all the way down to as small as you want. So I can even type in a number. So I can say 0.025, for example. And I can just offset it ever so slightly. And then if I click apply, actually getting ahead of myself, I want to choose weld offset so that the letters that are touching and are connected will become one image. So the F and the O will become one solid image. The N and the T will become a solid image, and anything else that's touching. So if I click apply, you can see what happens. Now, you can see that I still have a thin, delicate font, but now it just is a little thicker and will make cutting on my Cricut so much more successful. So tip 1A, if you need to use a thin font or thin image, this can be a design as well. Slightly offset your image so that it's a little thicker and it will be much easier to cut and weed. On the topic of fonts, fonts that are a little blockier and a little more bold work really, really great when working with any type of vinyl. Tip number 2, always use a weeding box. A weeding box is just that. It's a box that you apply around your design or text to make weeding easier. So on the left-hand side, you're going to click on the shapes panel, and you can use a free image for this. I'm going to use the square. And we're going to draw a box around our image. So I'm going to unlock it at the top, and I'm going to apply this box around my letters, and I can send it to the back or drag it down. I also want to add a box around brother. So I'm going to unlock that, send it to the back, and resize it as close to my letters as I want. You'll want to make sure that your box isn't cutting through any of your letters. I also like to add a rectangle all the way around my entire design, and that will leave me with really great scraps for future projects. So I just grab my square and turn it into a rectangle, and then I can drag it down to the bottom. And if you want to center it all up using your align tools, you can do that. And once you're happy with everything, you're going to highlight over all of the boxes and your design and choose attach. Now when it's time to weed your project, you have small sections to weed at a time. So you're not working against an entire image, you're just doing a little at a time. And in the end, it will leave you with really great rectangular scrap pieces as well. Tip number 3 is that the brand of HTV that you're using matters. There are so many types of HTV on the market, and they are not all created equal. And a good quality brand doesn't always mean it's expensive. So the HTV that I recommend is from 143 Vinyl. You can get it other places as well, but I buy mine from 143 Vinyl. And I like the Starcraft HTV, the Soft Flex. And you can see here that the price is $12.99 for a 5-foot roll. So it's not more expensive than other brands on the market. Another option is Caesar HTV. I do like Caesar Easy Weed and Caesar Stretch. If you're just starting, these HTVs are great beginner-friendly HTVs. They are super easy to work with because they cut beautifully, they weed even better, and then when you go to transfer them, they actually hold up in the wash for those 30 plus washes. So definitely recommend starting with a good quality HTV, because if you start with a off-brand HTV and it's hard to work with, you may never want to use HTV again. So start with the good stuff early on. Tip number 4 is you want to ensure that your blade and your mat are clean. You want to ensure that your blade is clean and free of any debris, that there are no chips or dents in your blade, and that you are using a clean mat that actually holds your material in place. So there's no shifting and it's not sliding around. If your material is sliding, you may need to use a strong grip mat depending on the type of HTV, or even tape it in place, because if it slides around, you will not get a good quality cut. Tip number 5, and arguably the most important tip, is always do a test cut. If you have never worked with a specific HTV, or you just haven't cut it in a while, I would recommend doing a test cut. So say you took my advice and you purchased one of those brands of HTV that I recommended, but you've never used it. The company will give you recommended cut settings, but I still believe it's important to do a test cut on your machine with your blade and your mat to ensure that you don't waste any material. So to do that, you're going to grab the text tool and type out the letter R. When I worked at Cricut, I would always walk past the quality assurance team, and they were always cutting hundreds, maybe thousands of the letter R, because it had a good amount of curves and straight lines and points where things met, to give you a good idea if your machine could cut all of the different curves and lines and points. So this is a good test for your machine to make sure that it can cut through your material. So you're going to grab the letter R, of course, add a weeding box around it to make your life a little bit easier. So do the same thing where you grab a box, send it to the back, and then resize it to fit around your R and attach them together. I'd also recommend changing your R to a different color than whatever your project colors are. So we'll just change it to pink for this. So then that way your Cricut Design Space will separate it onto a different mat. So I'm going to cut a couple of R's so that you can see. I normally do my test cut around 1 inch, but I also want to do a few test cuts so we can see how small we can cut. So let's do 0.5, and we'll start with 0.3, and we'll do 0.15. And I don't need to arrange them like that. I can actually fit them together so we conserve more material. So I'm going to attach all these together. And this little test cut is only 1.4 by less than 1 inch. So very small amount of material that we're going to use to perform this test cut. And it will save us the headache if anything happens. If it doesn't cut through, then we can adjust the settings without wasting our entire project worth of material. So I'm going to click Make It. You can cut your material off the mat, but I do prefer cutting it on a mat. You'll want to mirror your image, and you can see how much space this takes up. It's very little space. And then click Continue. I have a little scrap of my material, and you'll want to place, for this iron-on, you'll want to place the shiny side down onto your mat. And then I am risking it just a little bit with my size scrap, but since it's just a test cut, I'm not too concerned. As I mentioned, the iron-on will come with recommended cut settings. For the soft flex that I'm using, they recommend cutting it on everyday iron-on. So here's our test cut. The letters are super small, but I think it actually was able to cut almost all of them. So here are the results of my test cut. Not only did I determine that my settings were correct, but I also determined how small this material can cut. So this tiny little guy is 0.15, and that is just too small for the machine. So you can see that it was lifting off the liner, and I would not recommend cutting that small. The smallest I'd probably go is 0.3. Sometimes I go down to 0.2, which is super small. And then if I peel it off the mat, you can see that the liner is intact. It didn't cut through the liner, so these settings are great. If it cut through the liner or it was difficult to weed, you can adjust your cut settings by going into the settings. I'll show you here on my computer. You can choose Browse All Materials, and the first thing you'll want to do is choose Material Settings here on the bottom left, and then you'll scroll down to Everyday Iron-On, and you can see that the pressure setting was 113. So if you cut through your material and you needed to do less pressure, you can scroll down to the bottom and use the Add New Material. We'll call this Soft Flex. Click Save. So if I had too much pressure, I would want to choose a value less than 113. I usually start in 10 increments. So if it was 113, I would probably do 103. Or if it was not enough pressure and I needed to cut deeper, I could go over 113 and do 123, for example. So depending on the results of your test cut, you can adjust the settings however you need to adjust them. So the goal is to do a kiss cut, and a kiss cut is where it goes through that first layer, but is still left on the liner. So if you cut through the liner, you would need less pressure, and if it was too hard to weed, you would need more pressure. The test cut is super important because if it fails, you've only wasted about 2 inches of material as opposed to ruining your entire project. Okay, so those are the 5 tips. I feel like I forget to mention them in my videos because I often do them subconsciously. So if I miss something, make sure to leave that in the comments, or if you're looking for any of the products used in today's video, those will all be linked in the video description. If you found this video helpful, make sure to like it, share it with your friends, and subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss any of my new content. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.